Welcome to our final session in this Historic Environment training course. As the title of this session suggests, Success and Failure in Delivering Sustainable Woodlands, we're going to touch on some of the practical issues that arise from achieving the objectives of the UKFS. The correct management of the historic environment is a work in progress. There are some excellent exemplars of the work being delivered today, but there are also problems that have emerged from the failure, often through communication breakdown, to sustain best intentions through to forestry operations. To achieve sustainable management of the historic environment within forestry and woodlands, we must seek to identify compatible land use through identifying the key characteristics and sensitivities of our important heritage sites. Once we have a sound forest design that delivers this, we need to then monitor and manage these sites so that as forestry operations progress, we have confidence that these sites continue to retain their importance and value to society. The forestry industry are stewards of an important slice of our national heritage, and this session is about stewardship. The concept of long-term stewardship can't be better illustrated than in this example, the Iron Age fort at Habchester in the Scottish borders. With brutal clarity, you can see how different land use regimes can take their toll on an important site. On one side of the wall, decades of ploughing have gradually slighted the rampart, filled the ditches and left a hill devoid of the traces of this fort so evident on the other side of that wall. Small adverse impacts over time accumulate. The end result is the destruction of an important site. To start off, we're going to look at a positive outcome, focusing in on guidelines 15 and 17 that advocate managing wooding vegetation and removing vulnerable trees to prevent damage to an important heritage site, and the need to monitor sites to prevent degradation. Clearly, these guidelines are central to the longer-term management of sites and the progressive improvement in their condition. This example is the rampart of the important Pictish fort of Craigfadrick, standing above the Beaulieu Firth. An old planting regime brought forestry tight to the upper ramparts of the fort, overlying outer earthworks and damaging archaeological deposits. As you can see from the image, felling work is being progressed to gradually remove incursive woody vegetation and regenerating woodland. However, the work is being done gradually and wherever possible by hand. The aim being to give the slope time to re-establish a more beneficial grass sward, preventing the initiation of erosion from too extensive clearing in one episode. The last thing you want to do during active management is to swap one problem for another. Hard though it is to imagine, this view of the same fort shows how the views from Craigfadrick were disrupted by planted trees. These trees have since been felled in a manner that protected the archaeological site, and in so doing removed the threat of them damaging the ramparts should they have suffered from wind blow, while re-establishing clear and uninterrupted views across the Beaulieu Firth. The work at Craigfadrick has materially improved the condition and value of this site, bringing the forest into compliance with this aspect of the UKFS gradually. The FCS case study on respecting ramparts explores the principles of excellent work like this. By far the biggest danger to good forest design planning is the possibility that by the time the crop is extracted or thinning operations are being undertaken, we have forgotten why these clearings and open areas were created in the first place. Unless clear guidance to the contrary is in place within the operational plans, it's always possible that operators of heavy plant, especially contractors, will fail to spot those often subtle lumps and bumps in our landscape that are valuable elements of the historic environment. This is an issue of communication. Our first forestry operations example is focused on guidelines number 20 and 21. These highlight both that prior to operations near a scheduled monument, Historic Scotland should be consulted. On a similar basis, operations that could affect any heritage site should be a prompt for consultation of the local Archaeology service. These consultations are aimed at the next guideline, avoiding damage through ground disturbance. we looked at a 4-poster stone setting in the open space section of the last session. This is another 4-poster, a scheduled monument. You can see where forwarders and harvesters have moved past, avoiding the visible stones by staying as close to the forestry edge as they could. But this forest is not UKFS compliant. There is no 20-metre buffer around the scheduling. The vehicle movement has rutted and damaged ground within the scheduled monument, a statutory offence. If Historic Scotland had been contacted, they could have advised how to avoid this conflict and ensured a vehicle movement route was agreed that avoided conflict with this nationally significant monument. Instead, irreparable damage has been done. The rutting may be minor, but remember Habchester and what incremental damage can do. Looking at the next 3 guidelines, they explain how this sort of conflict should never have occurred. Number 22 stresses that such a site should have been in the operational plan, identified on the ground, excluded from the operational area, communicated to workers. More generally, the next guideline makes clear that areas of historic importance shouldn't generally be used for high-intensity activities like stacking and storing. Further, number 24 stresses the precautions needed when felling or extracting near vulnerable sites. Collectively, all these guidelines are seeking for forestry operations to be aware of and plan for the presence of heritage sites that have been protected within forestry. Where sites are known and identifiable, it is often a failure to communicate the operational plan that leads to the unnecessary conflict. In other cases, it is the earlier communication breakdown that has omitted to support sustainable forestry. As this forwarder track curves, falls and rises, it is crossing an Iron Age roundhouse, just visible with its outer circular bank. This undesignated site had survived earlier planting due to the careful action of the foresters. It was not then a known site, but it had been left in a small clearing. Subsequently, a pre-felling survey re-identified the site and it entered the official records. So far, we have an excellent story of retention and identification prior to harvesting. However, this diligence was undone by the damage which took place during the harvesting process. A failure to communicate the findings of the pre-felling survey into the operational plan. The significant damage of this site could have been avoided and the site marked out prior to forestry operations commencing. Some of this comes back to the inbuilt design features of the original forest plan. Quality design builds in protection into the layout of the forest. This graphic illustrates 2 aspects to this. In the upper pair, the benefit of separating the forest road from the heritage site with the fence, but without splitting the site in half, is clear. Any use of the road will not accidentally spill over onto the site. The lower pair illustrates a differing point, that clearings isolated in a forestry block will be discovered during harvesting and be a focus for vehicle movements. By ensuring access, but not through access, is maintained to the site, it will be easier to actively manage and hence keep at the forefront of forestry workers' awareness. Safety through design works for heritage sites. As we've touched on in session 5, when we looked at the good forestry practice requirements, there is the need, when opportunity arises, to make improvements to existing forests. We've seen the excellent work at Craigfadrick to achieve this for that Pictish hill fort. But there are many other sites where choices were made 10, 20 or 30 years ago, and the balance that was struck then in terms of recognising the significance of a site is not what we would attribute today. This site is near Ormeg on Mull. The left image shows a clearing with a good buffer left round a rock sheet exposure on which are carved a series of cup and ring markings. You may remember similar carvings shown in the first session on historic landscapes when we looked at natural places. The original planting had identified the most significant carvings and protected them. You can see also that the clearing had been maintained in good order, but there were additional carvings of lesser quality, as are shown in the right image. When designing the restocking of the area, it was recognised that these would nowadays have been protected. So harvesting was undertaken in a manner that would minimise the risk of damage to the rock sheets, and a larger open space was designed to encompass all the rock carvings. With careful management, this clearing will protect and pass on these evocative monuments to future generations.
I'm Emma Stewart. I'm an environment forester and I work for Forestry Commission Scotland. I'm based in one of the forest districts managing part of the National Forest Estate. It's my job to make sure that we implement the correct management for the historic environment in my local area on the National Forest Estate. And a big part of that job is working with the other departments in the forest district. So that's the harvesting team, the planning team, communities, and also the estates team. And making sure that we take policy and guidance and as much information as we can gather about sites, and we include all of that into our planning at every stage through the process. When I'm advising the other departments in the Forest District, I take into account everything that's going on in the area. So I look at the historic environment at the same time as looking at the ecology and the impact of the forest operations, the strategic objectives that we have for that area, and also considering the communities and recreational interests in the area as well. So we try to look at everything in the round rather than isolating any aspect from each other. I think the historic environment's really important actually, because it helps build the character of a place and the sense of a place, and sense of place is something that is really highly valued by local people and both visitors. It helps us understand who we are and our culture, but it also provides significant, rich learning opportunities and chances for us to engage with local people and visitors and help them understand their local environment and what happened in the past. Sometimes the historic environment can also help us as the modern day land managers understand and manage the land better by looking at what happened in the past. We had a large project in my area which was really interesting. It was for Wilsontown Ironworks, which is an 18th century ironworks in Lanarkshire. And we started engaging with local people in the year 2000. And when we started speaking to local people about the area, we discovered that they felt very, very passionately about the place and very strongly associated with it. So that drove us to take more of an interest and discover more about the place and take more of a role managing it positively. So we discovered that in the 1970s, previous forestry workers had demolished some buildings, and that had created a lot of bad feeling. But when we looked at the site in modern day, we could see an opportunity for improving the site for local people and for visitors, and providing a better opportunity for people to understand the archaeology and the historic environment. We removed a lot of conifer trees that had been inappropriately planted across some of the environment, and we did that really sensitively by using a helicopter. Since then, we have created a fantastic new path network, which is some of it available for people with wheelchairs and disabilities, and we get a lot more visitors now. For example, people with pushchairs and buggies, kids on bikes, so it's opened up the site to a lot more people. And we've recently installed a whole suite of interpretation using panels, but also using artistic ironwork features, gates, benches, and we've upgraded the car park. So that allows local visitors to come and understand the site when they go and have a walk around, but we've also created some information online on our website. And the website has been the link to the wider international community who are interested in finding out more about the place, because they have family history connections to this important industrial heritage site.
There is sometimes apparent conflict in the guidelines. Number 19 identifies that erosion from visitor pressure should be avoided, while number 28 advocates considering the provision of access. There's a balance here. The protection and retention of significant heritage sites in appropriate open space and settings is so that they can be both a heritage resource and they can benefit our communities here and now, shaping and informing our sense of place. Access is important, but not at the cost of the monument that you are providing access to. Back to Habchester, I'm afraid. A small Iron Age dune overlooking the Carl of Lacouche, a viewpoint that many trudged up to, but in the absence of a path, the instinct was to scale the slope. A small grassed over route can be seen that heads straight for one of the walls of the dune. This was causing significant damage to the dune. The solution was a short path that leads walkers around the knoll and in through the original entrance. No path or elaborate protection was needed for within the dune once those same view seekers were delivered safely to the original threshold stone. Access was improved, damage halted, but visitors were not excluded from the site, nor did the new path damage the site. An excellent outcome. There's one final issue that can make many nervous. Guideline number 8 highlights the need to report any discovery of artefacts or bone. This is very important, but not to level any form of blame on the forestry workers, rather the opposite. No matter how prepared the mitigation process is and management plans are, there's always the potential for unknown features or artefacts to be disturbed or discovered during working operations, through storm damage, animal burrowing, or from the public bringing them to your attention. All heritage professionals know this and are delighted to have new discoveries brought to their attention. This is the root plate from a tree that was blown over in Fife a couple of years ago. Walkers passing the fallen tree noticed something unusual within the soil ripped skywards as the tree fell. A close-up on the right shows the well-preserved remains of a Bronze Age pottery vessel, an urn that had been filled with the cremated remains of an individual buried in a small pit, with the urn inverted to protect the remains it held. This is a wonderful find. There would have been no surface indication that this could have been there, and it was only by the diligence of those passing by the tree that this burial was recovered, examined, and added to our understanding of the past of the local area. As is clear from the UKFS guidelines, sustainability can be achieved for our forests and woodlands. To do this, we need to have good site-specific information, sound forestry design to protect our important sites, and the commitment to ongoing stewardship. These three elements will ensure that the monuments passed down to us remain tangible markers of those past societies that lived in and shaped the same landscape we work in and care for today.